Comment section is fired up on Monday morning. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. That is Sean Fitz, recruiting expert and insider for Blue White Illustrated. All kinds of questions coming in. We'll get to those in just a minute, but we got a jam-packed recruiting show for you this morning. So good morning, Fitz. How are we doing today after a very full weekend, which also included some travel for you as well?
Yeah, we're back in State College. Great. We had a camp yesterday that we're going to talk about here in a little while. It's an official visit weekend, very busy weekend on the site. Hopefully you checked it out, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Ton of information this weekend. Stay ahead of the game. Check it out. That's my pitch. But yeah, we're surviving. I was talking to a bunch of people on campus yesterday at camp, and June has just turned into a hellscape for recruiting in terms of like official visits. Follow that up with camps. We got a team camp on Friday, which is all day long. So these guys are grinding. Kenny Sanders was a zombie the other day or last night when I was talking to him. Of course, he has two young twins at home that he's got to go home to, so there's no sleep waiting for him there either. Yeah, he's there's a lot going on right now. So June has gone from basically time off to now all of a sudden it's crammed into their camps, official visits, unofficial visits, all this kind of stuff. But Penn State's doing well with it. So that's why we're here. That's what we're here to talk about.
Yeah, that's one thing I noticed yesterday is I got home from camp after a full day of working on some stuff for the site beforehand, working the day before, kind of trying to keep my ear to the ground. And I thought to myself, like, I'm not doing nearly as much as the coaching staff. I do not know how they do it. And they do it year round. Like, there are only, maybe 2 months in the year where they get, like, significant breather room in any way. So, like, it's an amazing feat of human will, just being a college football coaching staff.
Yeah, it's February and May pretty much, and May is not always the case either. July, I guess you could add the dead period in from June to July, but those are the downtimes right now, and it's no wonder that so many coaches are jumping to the NFL. I mean, it's just it's like you can't put those things beside each other. Yes, it's both coaching football, but it's very, very different in terms of schedule, in terms of work-life balance, things like that. So it's no wonder that these guys are all keeping an eye on the NFL.
So let's get into some of the stuff they've been working on, which we're going to start with the official visit weekend. I always love this particular weekend where they get all the committed players together because we get awesome photos like this, looking like literally the college class that they're building. The photos are always fun for me. So take us through what you've been through, kind of an open-ended conversation here of some of the stuff you want to talk about, because this is the information. This is the premium content. BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, as Fitz mentioned before. You want to get that information, get all of it, you sign up there. But we'll talk a little bit about some of the stuff that's coming out of this. So what do you want to start with when it comes to official visits and recapping what Penn State was able to do this weekend?
Well, we'll keep that photo up, and you look at the guys that are out there that are committed to Penn State. And these are funny because we play with these, and there's angles and there's ways to make yourself look bigger. Garrett Sexton just looks big in general. Like he's there on the left side of that photo, 71, big kid, going to continue to get bigger, and that's really funny when you think about all the the stuff that we talked about when he committed at 240 pounds or so. Kid keeps getting bigger. We're going to start talking about Ian Boyer in that manner because he just looks, the angle's
77.
not great for him. At 77. Quentin Martin there on the left. This guy, wow. I feel bad for Anthony Specca because Specca's not a small guy, but Quentin Martin he looks like he looks like that assembly line of running backs that Penn State has put out, like Nick Singleton, just like it from a physical perspective. Like he looks like a dude there, and you can't see it in the back, but everybody came away this weekend raving about Cooper Cousins, how big he is, how ready he looks. He's back tucked there behind James Franklin, who actually looks pretty small. James is funny, man, because we had this discussion every year. He's 6'2", like he's a big dude. He's I think down 20 pounds. He's doing a great job this offseason. But he's a bigger guy, a taller guy than you would think. So like looking at this is a little bit different than looking at Nick Saban with his commits, because Nick's a little guy. You've got that. You've got Luke Reynolds, who just continues to impress, like everything. Like he was up there at the showcase in Massachusetts, or the New England showcase. Schools came in to see him, and schools were mighty impressed with him. And that from being a situation where we weren't sure if Penn State was ready to take him because of the question marks about his ability to play tight end. He was, of course, a high school quarterback and things like that. But this guy looks like he might go further from where he was ranked when he committed to where he's going to end up. He may go further than anybody in the class. So, and now you're looking at me, which is very different than looking at that photo. We're not going to talk about physical appearance right now because I'm coming off of a 10-day trip away from home, and it was, oh boy. But anyway, that's your Penn State class of 2024. Did not get bigger this weekend. You know, we read our notes. I'll say that as we continue to put out these pitches to come check out BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. There's a lot going on. I would label it as a productive weekend for Penn State. Whether that makes it the way to Twitter or not, or YouTube, I don't know. But Penn State had a bunch of official visitors on campus this weekend, 20 in total, 7 uncommitted official visitors, and I think they did really well.
What are some of the positive takeaways that are, you know, I'll phrase it this way through William Foster in the comments. Why no commitments? 3 last weekend. Why no commitments this weekend? Is Penn State not leaning heavy enough on these players? I don't think it's necessarily that, but you're setting up for something really good, right? Like, so a productive weekend doesn't mean that you're getting commitments, but you're putting yourself in a great position, putting your best foot forward where you feel like coming out, you're in the lead. Is that a fair way to phrase that, or what is the positivity and the productivity that you're evaluating this weekend?
For some guys, it is. For other guys, it's a situation to set it up for what they want to do. So, like, I will say that there have been situations where guys have committed, and they wait till July to announce. I think that's going to happen. Like, I think that that's a situation that Penn State has found itself in right now. Now, you kind of have to play that game where you're going to accept the commitment from the guy, and you're going to take him at his word that he's going to announce when he says he's going to announce, and hopefully not slip any trips in. Very possible that it's, I mean, it has already happened, but it's going to be interesting to follow the next couple of weeks, because on one hand, you're feeling pretty good. Kid says he's coming. The parents, the coach, you feel good about where you stand. But time is still something that exists here, so you're gonna have to wait a couple of weeks sometimes in that case. So, like I said, Penn State did really well this weekend. Penn State had some top-notch targets on campus this weekend. The guy that we looked to coming out of that weekend, Vabu Toure. Ryan's already talked to him with the article on BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Supposed to go to Kentucky for an official visit this week. That's one that you feel really, really good if you're Penn State. But maybe just not ready to announce. That's kind of how that goes sometimes. Some other top targets were on campus this weekend. Malachi Williams, defensive end from Philly. Nick Marsh, the wide receiver from Michigan. Excuse me. There's a lot of guys on campus, so it's easy to get those guys mixed up. Jamonta Waller from Mississippi. Penn State continues to have the edge for him. Now, I'm not ready to put a pick in because he's from Mississippi. That's a long way away. He's got some other visits coming up to some big-time schools. And once again, it's a long way away. So you're looking at a mix of guys, and coming out of this weekend, you feel really, really good. As I said, time is something that can take that edge off. The post-visit high is something that we always talk about. You're going to have to let that settle for a little bit, and maybe they come back around. I think you'd see a guy like Amaris Williams last weekend he visited Penn State, wants to visit some other schools as well. So like that is something where you're going to have to be patient.
Penn State also point out.
Sorry, that was a long dramatic pause by me, not a turning it back over pause. So let me try that again.
Okay.
Penn State's gonna be fine. Like, they're doing really, really well this summer, and it continues to have they have a bunch of guys on campus coming next weekend for official visits. But it's going to be one of those things where at the end of the month, or probably by the middle of July, you're gonna look back and say, "Man, I think Penn State knocked it out of the park here."
One of the, I think, differences between last weekend and to kind of follow up on that original question, why no commits? Dewan Lane, Xavier Gilliam were guys that you and Ryan were targeting for a while to commit to Penn State. These were guys where it was a heavy lean, and not to say that it was going to happen exactly that weekend, but for both of those guys to commit coming out of their official visit, not necessarily a surprise. The guys this weekend are players with a lot of options, and not to say that those other guys didn't, but Penn State was clearly their top option. And it was more of, hey, I want to make this official during the official visit. These are guys that are still weighing their options because Marsh, Waller, Williams to a certain extent. All of them are prospects that are in the top 300 that have other schools and other official visits to take. So I think if you're looking for Penn State to nail these guys down and get them committed out of their first visit or maybe their second visit, it might be a little unrealistic in this particular climate. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. Yeah. With the except, I mean, Malachi Williams is still going to visit Pitt and Syracuse, so like that's a little bit different. Nick Marsh, still, I guess Michigan State is in the mix here, and he was already committed there, so it kind of changes the math on that one a little bit. But Waller has a big visit this weekend to Florida. Florida, by the way, Penn State and Florida going head to head as typical natural geographic rivals they are, right. With Waller, Liam Andrews, Amaris Williams, who I mentioned a while ago. Like there's a lot of guys that are sort of in that. Jaylen Harvey was over there, or was down there this weekend. So a lot of head-to-head, seemingly head-to-head with Florida, Benedict Gume as well. But you've got Waller going to Florida, and then he's going to go to Georgia. So that one's certainly big there. Torrey, I don't think he's going to Oklahoma anymore. So that's an interesting one there. Yeah, I would say if I were to overgeneralize it, the guys that didn't commit in that first weekend have some more visits to take, have some bigger suitors, if you will, if you want to use hand quotes there. And I would say the same about these guys. Jameer Grimsley was on campus, just put up an update on him before we came live on the YouTube show. Jameer Grimsley, Bama is floating around, and if Bama wants you, you're probably going to check out Bama. Let's talk logic here. So I would agree with your take as a sort of a generality. The guys that they got last weekend, good players, no doubt about it, but didn't have I don't want to say didn't have the options, but also like we're further along the recruitment when they got there.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the right way to phrase that. Got some things in the chat I want to get to here as well. Chris Gorky says, great work, Fitz and T. Frank. Appreciate you, Chris. Appreciate you donating to the channel. If you want to be like him, put something in the tip jar. The super chats are always open. We're always welcoming those into the show. And if you have a question to go with it, we'll always make sure we get to that question. This one came in. This has been a common question over the last couple of weekends, either here in the live chat or comments on the YouTube channel. We haven't really dug into this yet. Kevin Haywood, that situation. What happened with Kevin Haywood, asks MED2659. Do you have any insight into that situation of him committing to Wisconsin after being such a big talking point for Penn State recruiting over probably since this time last year when he camped at Penn State and was a massive, well-moving offensive lineman?
We love to play the Penn State moved on game when guys go elsewhere. Penn State would have taken Kevin Haywood. They've been recruiting him for a long time, spent a lot of time investing in that recruitment. They would have taken him. Was he the top guy on their board at offensive tackle? Not really, but that's kind of irrelevant at this point because they would have taken him. He was in a tier high enough where they would have taken him. I'm not here to play the narrow shoulders, upper body thing. Kid is a really, really good athlete. His tape needs work, but he's an offensive lineman. You're going to have that for basically every offensive lineman you get. So I'm not here for the Kevin Haywood slander. He committed to Wisconsin. Penn State would have taken him from multiple sources there. So I'm not going to go after that. It was a really, I will say it was a weird recruitment. Like it
felt like that. Yeah.
He was, it felt like he was going to jump on board last fall and then kept stringing it out. I think there were some other things at play there. He came for the blue-white game, told people, told other prospects he was about as close as he could get without committing, and now doesn't set up an official visit. So, I think there was some things at play there that, dig into at a later date, I'm sure, but it was definitely a weird recruitment. But yeah, Penn State would have taken Haywood. He's an in-state kid. He's a premium position, offensive tackle. Like I said, he will need to improve, but I think he's got all the, it checks a lot of boxes in terms of what he can do to become a player at the next level. Wisconsin's interesting, man, because that's not the Wisconsin, like Kevin Haywood is a big dude, no doubt about it. And fits that Wisconsin profile, but they're not really recruiting like that right now. They took Ryan Corey from Western Pennsylvania, does not fit the mold of what a typical Wisconsin offensive lineman looks like. So that new staff has come in there. They've shaken some things up. They've done, we talked a lot about Wisconsin this spring when Penn State was getting Corey Smith and Garrett Sexton, Donnie Harbor and things like that. So very interesting approach. Don't know if it's the right approach. Don't know if it's the wrong approach, but Wisconsin has sort of changed up the way that they do things with that new staff coming in.
Yeah. Luke Fickell does not run the football in a traditional way that Wisconsin is used to running the football. I don't know if they're going to change. I don't know how that will factor in, but it's going to be interesting to watch that particular program evolve. Another
And
question
and
here.
And
Go
I
ahead.
will add one more thing on Haywood because Rick makes a point here. It says moved on an offensive line. Penn State had a lot of targets on the offensive line, like
Yes.
especially like there were legitimate tackles out there along with Haywood. This wasn't a situation where they held out for one guy, and then they got burnt. They took Sexton, they took Egan Boyer. You've got Cooper Cousins who could also play tackle. So there are options there. It wasn't a situation where, I don't know that Haywood was holding Penn State hostage or anything like that, but they had other guys. Troutwine was comfortable taking those other guys, and they did that. That's kind of what happens. And when you expand your board the way that he has in the last several cycles, that's kind of the position that you hope to find yourself in. And is, hey, I don't have to hold out for this. Gerby Lambert's going to come in for an official visit, later this month. So like there are still names out there as Penn State continues to play that board. And with offensive linemen, it's a crapshoot. You hope you get the best ones, even all the way up to the NFL. You don't know if that guy is going to translate. So Penn State's got a couple of ones that we think can be very good, and we're going to see if they develop over the next couple of years, because it's a situation where you can't make that call when these guys are going into their senior year of high school. Like, who's going to be the absolute best? What was the guy for the from Central Michigan, the number 1 draft pick, Winter? Nobody saw that one coming, and college coaches, recruiting sites, even eventually the NFL. You cannot. It's not an exact science on the offensive line.
Yeah, and you look at the photo here. To your point about having a lot of offensive line targets, a third of the people in this photo are offensive linemen, and they're all huge. So that's not a bad place to be. We got another question here about Josiah Brown. What's the situation, do you think? Penn State, just an update on what you think of Josiah Brown's recruitment and Penn State versus Rutgers for one of Penn State's receiver targets here.
He's got a tiny visit to Georgia in there as well. So, we don't like to downplay these guys. Rutgers, Georgia, just throw them in the same bucket. But no, I think Penn State's done a pretty good job. I keep saying that you can't cut out Rutgers, or you can't count out Rutgers here, and people will laugh about that. It's Rutgers. I get it. But at the same time, they have an influence over those New York guys because it's far enough from home, but it's also really close to home. The coaches are all in there and things like that. So they've done a really, really good job recruiting Josiah Brown. And, sometimes some of those guys are, I don't want to say homebodies, but you look at Moses Walker in the last cycle. Penn State wanted Moses Walker. And for a linebacker, Penn State versus Rutgers, you put all this stuff on paper and it points strongly in one direction. I think you can do the same thing for Josiah Brown. Is you put all that stuff on paper, and why go to Rutgers? But they're doing a really, really good job recruiting them. They've got some good recruiters over there. So I would not write them off whatsoever. Like that's the sort of thing. We look at the logos and we say, okay, he's got official visits to Penn State, Georgia, and Rutgers. All right, just throw Rutgers aside. I don't see that as a situation right here. May very well end up at Penn State. Fran Brown has been recruiting him hard at Georgia, and Fran has done a really, really good job of getting back into the Northeast and getting some of those guys down there. So this one, I still think is pretty wide open. And again, just can't count out Rutgers on this one.
Yeah, and I think it's also telling that Georgia coming back up north for speed. And if you think speed isn't important at receiver, look at the Georgia recruits that Penn State that they pulled from Penn State over the last couple of years, or that they're trying to here with Brown. And then
Yazeed Haynes was last year.
Thank you. Yazeed Haynes was the other guy I was thinking of, who was super fast, tall, long. Speed is very important in college football. Got 20 minutes of good conversation. If you haven't decided yet that we have the best show for you to learn about Penn State football recruiting, then I don't know what you're waiting for. Blue White Illustrated here on YouTube. We're giving you the great stuff, so please subscribe to Blue White Illustrated on YouTube and hit the like button for this video. It helps to spread the word of us being live right now. But really, the thing you can do to help us the most, if you're one of the hundreds of people watching and you haven't subscribed yet, come on, just hit this. It's free. It takes you literally one click. Also, want to let you know that the show is brought to you by My Perfect Franchise. Now, My Perfect Franchise is Andy Ludicky. He is a franchise consultant. So if you don't know what any of this means, first off, if you're interested in leaving your current job or diversifying your income, if you're in the corporate rat race, you're a middle management corporate CEO sort of type, then this is for you. If you're looking for a side hustle maybe, or you have a passion, there's something that you want to do with your life and you want to break out of what you're currently doing, check out My Perfect Franchise. Andy Ludicky is a franchise consultant with extensive experience placing people like you in a franchise to manage so that you can buy into whatever franchise you're interested in. His services are 100% free. He's here to help if you have any questions. You can check out the message board, another great reason to sign up for Blue White Illustrated premium content. You can go on there, you can message him, Andy Ludicky, and have a conversation on the thread for this show. Or you can just give him a call, 404-973-9901, or Andy at myperfectfranchise.net. Thanks again to Andy for sponsoring our recruiting content. He is a fan of YouTube and recruiting, so that makes this a perfect match. Fitz, we were at camp yesterday. I'm sure we'll get some more comments and questions about recruiting as we go throughout the show, but camp yesterday, there weren't as many names or storylines coming in terms of Peter Gonzalez, who had an important weekend last weekend. Some of the Penn State recruits that were already committed were at last weekend's camp. Fewer of those this week, but there's still players to discover. So let's talk through some of the guys that stood out to each of us. I'll let you go first. Some of the guys that stood out to you during camp.
Let's scroll down here. Camp was, as you said, not one of the better ones that we've seen. Tony Williams was up from Florida. I believe top 200 guy in the class of 2025 from Palm Beach. So like he was probably one of the better quote unquote prospects on hand. Looked like a good player, probably going to be a safety, I would say, at the next level. I'm not sure that he can. I think he worked out some with the corners, but he was a guy that we were watching, had a nice interception, seemed to take to the coaching well. Visited Pittsburgh on Saturday, came up to Penn State on Sunday, worked out for the staff. So I think that's a good start. His offer list probably not as high as his ranking is or his rating is right now. But I think other schools will continue to come along. Good size, solid speed, things like that. So that was one to watch there. John Marie Thomas, as you said, 2024s. It's there's a certain boat of guys that are coming in to either establish themselves and earn an offer, or they already have an offer. They're trying to push it over the line. Thomas kind of fits in that last category. Penn State offered him early. It's going to be tough for them to have space for a safety, especially a safety without great size. But Thomas came in, ran a 4.4, really athletic kid. He's going to make somebody happy at some point. I just don't know that it's going to be Penn State. And Lyric Samuel is a guy that jumped out from a testing perspective, over 6'3", ran a 4.56, I think it was, as a 2025 from New York. He was a guy that was in for a visit a couple of weeks ago, came back, worked out at camp, and I think he helped himself with his performance at camp this weekend.
A couple guys that I noticed, and a lot of it was the looks like game. But one guy that backed it up, Ty Wilkerson, 2026 safety prospect, working out with the safeties. He ran well, tested well, and then looked good in drills. And he is a Berwick kid, so a local small town player that I think, based on his frame and based on his ability to move, that's a guy that's going to be in serious consideration for Penn State down the line. So I didn't spend a ton of time with the safeties or the DBs. I was with the big men for most of the day because there were some big dudes, but he was one guy that I thought stood out pretty well during drills. One really good intercept, they were doing interception drills, so it wasn't like it was a one-on-one situation, but he went up behind himself, the ball was underthrown behind him, one-handed it out of the air, so good movement skills, good turning ability. I'll be interested to see how that one develops. You had a tight end in mind as well, right?
So there were a couple guys yesterday where I recognized the name of the school, but I have to open Google Maps sometimes to check that out. From Southern Lehigh. We haven't had too many Southern Lehigh prospects. Andrew Olish worked out with Ty Howell yesterday. Looked pretty good. Over 6'4", skinny guy, but his testing numbers pretty well off the charts. I mean, if you look at, and I'm just doing this off the top of my head, but if you look at Luke Reynolds from last year, right in line with where Luke Reynolds was. Don't know that he's going to be a big-time prospect, but he's going to have schools that end up looking at him. Joe Moorhead offered him last week, so I take a lot of stock in what Joe says, especially about tight ends. He ran a 4.2 shuttle at over 6'4". That's really impressive, really, really impressive. So, another one of those Pennsylvania guys that popped up. I also had a Minersville quarterback pop up, and I tell you what, that's my first Minersville experience with a prospect, 2026 Dante Carr, good looking prospect there to watch for years going forward. And that's really what these camps have sort of become, is 2025 guys, 2026 guys that you can keep an eye on down the road. While we're talking about Dante Carr, a couple other quarterbacks there, Eli Hamrick from IMG Academy, 2026 quarterback, looks to have the size.
Kid.
Yeah, big kid, looks to have the size, athletic kid. Ethan Houck from Brunswick, Maryland, sort of my old neck of the woods, was a really good athlete as well. And Josh Anderson from North Carolina, I don't know that he's a scholarship guy, but if Penn State could get him as a walk-on, really athletic kid, threw a pretty nice ball as well. I don't know how much he's got going on in his recruitment, but he's one of those guys that caught my eyes among the quarterbacks. And it was a pretty solid group of quarterbacks. Oh, and by the way, Kirk Herbstreet's son, Chase, was on hand on Sunday checking things out. I knew you wanted to get to that to that clip there. But he looks a lot like Dad. He was a guy that was there as well.
Yeah, there was a couple of Brand Mandler quarterbacks brought up a couple of guys to go to camp, and Herbstreit was one of them. Another guy, Nolan Beard, probably one of the biggest quarterbacks, maybe one of the most prospect-ready quarterbacks. 6'5", threw the ball pretty well. Still working on some things. Nolan Beard was his name. So there a couple of guys that stood out, but the quarterback class, a lot of the guys that I was watching was Hamrick and some of the younger guys that are 25, 26, because that group of like the top quarterbacks, you could tell that having watched Ethan Grunkmeyer last week and go through the drills and see him in a comparative situation, these guys generally were a tier below that. Even though they were young, and that's kind of the point that you were making, is a lot of these guys aren't going to look great, but do they have the right size? Are they on the right trajectory? Do they have the right building blocks to make themselves a prospect in 2 years or so? And that's where I think we're going to transition to the big men at camp, because that's where we spent a lot of our time, especially during the one-on-ones. Caleb Brewer, he's been at Penn State camp the last 2 weeks, working with Phil Troutwine. I think this is one of the smartest things you can do, is if you're a prospect, even if you're committed and you want to get some extra work with your coach. He went through the one-on-ones quite a bit. There was, you can see here, lost a little bit early, but a guy who's progressing each and every rep. And that was really the story of camp for Caleb Brewer from last week to this week. And then even through this week is just really getting better at the offensive line, because there's, you watch his film, what Wyomissing does on the offensive line. This is the first time he's experiencing any of this stuff from a pass protection standpoint, playing tight end there and how much they run the football. What did you see from Brewer in terms of how he interacted with the coaches and what your evaluation of him was during camp?
Very coachable. He caught some things from Frank Leonard, who everybody in that building catches things from Frank Leonard because he's so loud. But James Franklin was there. Phil Troutwine was there. Frank Leonard was there. This is a guy that does not know how to pass block. And that's not a criticism. That's just where he comes from. They pass the ball twice a game, something like that. In fact, Franklin was busting his chops there because, hey, it would really help us out if you guys, pass the ball and you learn how to do it. And on top of that, he's a tight end. So even when they do pass the ball, he's going out for routes. So no clue what he's doing. And that's something that's the reason he keeps coming back to camp and checking things out. He was here for his official visit. When that official visit ends, he was able to go out and work with the staff there on his own. So it's very much a work in progress. I know Ryan and I are on opposite sides of the fence here. I think he's going to be an offensive lineman. Ryan thinks he's going to be a defensive lineman. I can see where Ryan's coming from there. But he continues to work out on the offensive line. Going to have to get better. Going to have to learn to pass protect. But we said the same thing about Javen Williams. Javen Williams is going to have to do the same thing coming from that same program, is going to have to learn how to pass protect. And he's done some nice things on campus so far on blue-white game and things like that. But as you see, a long way from the wing T to being a pass protector in the Big Ten.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities in terms of their game between Javen and Caleb, because Caleb is a great athlete. I mean, I'll throw this up here again. If you just look at him, he's 285, 90 pounds of pure muscle. Like, he is a very fit offensive lineman, and he moves really well. It's just he doesn't know how to specifically use technique yet, and that's, I think, where Penn State is betting on the upside of athleticism, because you get a guy that can move like that, get to the second level. Something that Chuck Losey said earlier this week when we were talking about Javen in terms of how he is as an athlete. Javen explosive and big, but maybe not the strongest guy in the world. At the core, you need to have strength in these things. I'd say Caleb, a strong player that has some good explosiveness. Obviously, not 5-star skills like Javen, but has a good skill set to work with. He just needs to refine all of that, and it's going to take a lot of work for him to do that. Some of the other guys that we saw in the one-on-ones, probably the best player that did the best overall, Isaac Sowell. Did you have anything that stood out here about some of the interior guys?
Soul's going to be a center, and he looks like he is extremely well coached. Like I know, I believe his father was there with him. His father's a big dude. Soul is about 6'1.5", so he's going to be a center at the next level. But he sits as well as anybody that we've seen at camp this year. So a really good job by him. He's a 2025 prospect from Kentucky. That size is going to be a factor for him at some point. Hopefully, he grabs a couple inches from dad and eventually becomes a bigger prospect. But in terms of fundamentals, it's kind of a guy that you look at. When we looked at Mike Miranda, we saw that obviously the size was something that was tough to overcome eventually in his career. But like from a fundamental standpoint, from a guy that you look at and say this guy can be really successful. I don't know at the top level because of that size and the length and things like that. But he's a really good player.
Yeah, good length, despite the height being one thing, at least he has that length for him. But the overall package, that is, I think, a fair question to be, is he going to be big enough for Penn State? And that was the interesting thing of when we were watching a lot of the big men, the guys that were big enough that we thought that we identified early in camp, and I kind of followed throughout camp, they weren't necessarily the best guys in the one-on-ones or some of the movement skills. Was there anybody that stood out to you that you think there's an opportunity for development, even if they didn't have the best overall camp?
I think you're setting me up here for Isaiah Hammond from Calvert Hall in Maryland. When you walk in, like he's a first off the bus type guy. He's a big dude, 6'5", 275, long arms, got everything you want as a future defensive tackle, 3 technique, things like that. It was a bit frustrating to watch. Deion Barnes was getting a little frustrated on the side, just played extremely high with kind of the same moves over and over again. He kept getting beat and kept getting frustrated. This is a guy that schools will offer because of that size and because there is some baseline athleticism to work there. A long way to go as a football player. But like this is a guy just to keep it in the back of your mind, because if he develops, and maybe he develops on the offensive side of the ball, like Phil Troutwine pulled him aside yesterday after camp and worked him out with some offensive line drills. Maybe he does that, but he's just got that size that you can't ignore. And I know people hate that when you just like look at the kid and say this kid is a D1 prospect because of his size, and that's about it right now. Yeah. But is a big man's game. Like this is that's how it works. And sorry to you, I know your hopes were dashed of a Division I career because of size and only because of size. But that's kind of how it works at this high level. And he's a guy to watch because of it. But in terms of camp performance, it did not live up to the expectations once we saw him walk in the gym.
Yeah, my guy that had a similar day, but I think the building blocks are all there, and you'll understand why maybe the performance isn't there, was Jacob Burns. Jacob Burns is 6'5", almost the same size, 6'5", 275, and he's a 2027 prospect. So this is a freshman offensive lineman. Very raw, obviously very raw for being that young. Was the only freshman that was in the big men competition. But you see here, even in the video, he got better. And when you're looking for size, length, decent movement skills, didn't test well, but again, very young player. That's a guy to keep your, in the back of your mind. You want to monitor how he progresses over the next couple of years. Maybe he comes back to a Penn State camp next year and you can compare his athleticism and his skills. But you're that young, you're that big, you're a prospect. And I was watching him throughout camp, very interested in how he moves, because I thought he moved really well in terms of like the basics of playing offensive line and using short, choppy steps, being on base, being on balance, all those things. But then putting it all together in movement was obviously against veteran players that have a bevy of pass rushing moves. He did struggle, but when he got his hands on guys, it was over. So that would be the one of the big men that I'm looking forward to seeing how they progress throughout his career. Anybody else that stood out to you the other day?
I think we're going to get to our new offers section. So that's the guy that I've circled, as you could probably imagine. I know you know a little bit more about that, but you want to just play the imaging here, or should we get into it? Okay.
Give me 1 second. Here we go.
About the future of Penn State, there's a lot of excitement. This is a really, really important day to a bunch of young men and their families.
So far, not as many offers coming out of this camp as we kind of set up at the beginning of the show, but one of them, very important. We have a long snapper offer. Ryan, take us through this here.
Well, I'm not Ryan, but that's okay.
Oh my God! Wow!
I was
Sorry,
reading
Fitz.
your updates before I got up there, and they had some long snapper work going in. So of course that's right where I went as soon as I walked in. Andrew Dufault, a 5-star long snapper by Rubio Long Snapping. Sorry, you have to count them sometimes because they've got 6 stars as well. Number 4 in the country in the class of 2024 from Massachusetts. Looked really good. And I know we play the long snapper game. We make the jokes and things like that, but looked really good snapping. Earned an offer. He's going to be a walk-on offer, but earned an offer from Penn State after the camp. And Penn State has been doing pretty good in terms of this assembly line. Chris Stoll has been there for a long time, very high on Tyler Duzansky to take over for him. A couple of good ones underneath of him as freshman, but Dufault looks like the real deal in terms of snapping. So now that I've got that in, I appreciate the time that you let me spend on long snappers. But he looked like a real good one. It's got some real snap going back there.
Yeah, they had the gun on him on his the velocity on his snaps, and it all looked really good. Had him running, had him doing a bunch of drills. Also had him doing it right in like the prime area for where the quarterbacks normally are warming up. So it was like, oh good, here's a long snapper. This is an interesting thing. Now I've got to hoof it to the other side of the field to go look at the quarterbacks. So always a little bit of good, a little bit of bad with the long snapper situation. The only other offer that I found, Tony Williams, as we talked about, the safety from Florida got an offer. Reginald Vaughn, 2025 defensive lineman, was not at camp, but this is another interesting offer. Top 150-ish player in the on 300. So Dion Barnes putting himself out there for 2025 defensive lineman as well. So that rounds out the 3 that I had in terms of guys that got offers. Is there anybody else from the last week or so that stood out to you in terms of getting an offer from Penn State? Maybe not in the last couple of days, but anybody you had an eyeball on?
Not particularly. Just I was looking over the filters that I set up and things like that, and Penn State has sort of gotten into a situation where they're, you probably are going to be at camp if you're in that offer list or in that list of recent offers. I did still find that one interesting, the one in Mississippi, because Dion Barnes had a couple of defensive linemen on campus this weekend, and then he has to switch over to camp. So in the middle there, he managed to find this kid from Mississippi, get him on the phone and offer him. So that's just another point of how busy these guys are. And the recruiting just does not stop. Like, I know some of this is circumstantial, but the recruiting just does not stop for some of these guys.
There is a question in the chat here for you, Fitz, and I want you to know that you have a lot of sway over recruiting. Just like the one time I wore my Utah Utes pullover on the show and people were aghast. You were wearing a University of Vermont t-shirt. If potential recruits see this, they might go to Vermont over Penn State, says Tim C. So you are the t-shirt connoisseur of this show. You have the most interesting t-shirts on the show by far, but is there a story behind University of Vermont?
There's no style on the show. Let me get that out there. And Vermont, Penn State might schedule them for a home game. The way that they've scheduled these other guys. But no, I just I'm a big fan of the color. The Catamounts are I don't wear Penn State gear. Like it's an ethics thing. I don't wear Penn State gear. So I go onto home field and I find really good shirts that I like, usually with mascots with little sailor hats or whatever. But this one just jumped out at me. Like, it's the same thing as my Naval Academy shirt. Just kind of jumped out, the very plain throwback type shirt, and it's so comfortable. It's one of my most comfortable shirts. So no, there's really no crossover. We mentioned Penn State and Florida going head to head for recruits. Don't see it as often with Penn State and Vermont. So love the great state of Vermont and the people up there. But
always wanted to visit. Looks like a beautiful state.
Yeah, I went up there several years ago. One of my best college friends is from Vermont. So I went up there several years ago. Loved it. Hope to get up this spring, but didn't work out. So, but I kind of keep when I buy shirts like that, you've got a line, because it's not like I can get an Ohio State shirt or a Notre Dame, Michigan. It's got to be something obscure. So I get this. I've got my Colorado stuff. Got my Colorado School of Mines shirt that I'm a big fan of, and just things like that. You got to keep it light. And like I said, there's no style
Delaware.
show.
Can you get a Blue Hens? Is that safe?
Yeah, I think that's safe. I mean, I know they're on the schedule, but it's about the threat, really. Like the thing, how it goes. Like, I've got a University of Virginia shirt. I wear that. I have no problem with it whatsoever. So it's all about the how this looks coming off to the people, viewing this. Number one, doesn't really matter to me, but at the same time, like, you got to be smarter than that. You're running a business. So.
That's why I just wear blank collared shirts, like some sort of pullover or polo, just because it's like, it's inoffensive and people won't say. But yours, genuinely, I'm with the chat section. I'm always checking out what we got on Fitz to see what interesting school he's got on this week. So you have to tune in later to see what the next one is.
Yeah, I see Rob's got Northern Michigan. I'm going to take that up and see what kind of mascot they've got working here. So hopefully they got something good to go with. Like I said, I'm a sucker for the mascots. I'm a sucker for the animal mascots. The old timey, like, it was fascinating. I was reading something like Auburn and LSU share the same tiger because they had the same illustrator. It's just like different hats on there or something like that. It's really fascinating. Like I said, Home Field does a great job with not only comfort but style. And that, like I said, style, not my forte, but hey, I'm a 38-year-old dad of two. I'm not out here to impress anybody with my clothing choices. I am far from Nate Bauer when it comes to style, and I'm perfectly okay with that.
Well, we'll see what Nate's wearing. Got to get him on the show on Wednesday. Have a conversation about Penn State football. That'll be when we are back live next. I'm Thomas Frankar. He is our fashionista. Sean, is it fashionisto? I don't know. He's Sean Fitz. He's our recruiting insider. That's his main job. We'll be back on Wednesday. Fitz, thanks so much for your time today. And as always, subscribe to Blue White Illustrated on YouTube and BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. On the way out, let you know that it is $1 for 3 months. You cannot get a better deal than that unless you want to get 12 months for just $50. So get all that, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Subscribe here. We will talk to you on Wednesday.